We talk a lot about colony ships. We did like a three-part series on them.
Mhm.
And whenever I talk about these, people always say, who would sign up to be on a generation ship? It sounds horrible, cramped environments and all that. And I've always argued these things can be quite a lot larger than you actually think. And just to drive that point home is that we can turn our entire solar system into a colony ship.
Now, I mean, at that point, it's like, what do you even have to lose?
Hello and welcome to Entropy Rising, where we talk about science and futurism. I'm your host, Jacob, and as always, I'm joined with my wonderful co host, Lucas. Lucas, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful today, Jake. How are you?
I'm doing great. Any day where I can sit down and talk about moving stars is a pretty good day in my book, if I'm being honest with you.
Sounds like a great day.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So today we are diving into the topic of stellar engineering, which we have talked about Dyson swarms in the past, but this is actually, I would argue, maybe even a little more ambitious than that. We're going to be covering how we would mine stars for their materials and how we could potentially even move stars.
Yeah. I mean, the possibilities are endless when it comes to the materials and how we can mine stars. But the moving stars is what's really exciting because there's only a few concepts out there that we have right now for the possibility of doing that. So I'm excited to jump into this topic.
Yeah, me too. We're going to start off by covering how we would mine stars, and then I think after that progress into talking about moving stars. First of all, I want to start by talking about why we would even want to mine stars in the first place.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's the biggest thing in our solar system and in every solar system out there. And it is the most abundant resource of hydrogen, helium, and if you can get to the core, iron. And pretty much every material that our entire universe is made out of has all been birthed at one point in a star.
Actually, the iron and other elements in a star, they're not contained in the core. They're actually fairly uniformly dispersed throughout the entire star.
Really?
Yeah. So it's not like a planet where all the heavy metals sink into the center of stars, at least our type of star. They have a fairly uniform distribution throughout the entire star.
So if you were to go up there and just grab like a cup of star, it would have the most even distribution on the outside of it as it would on the inside, or is it slightly different? Or
It's about the same, yeah.
wow, that's incredible.
There might be more, off the top of my head, I'm wondering if there might be more helium in the core of the star, just because that's where the fusion reaction is actually happening, and then that gets distributed throughout the star. But these heavier elements, like especially iron, these aren't being created by any fusion processes, so they just get mixed throughout the star over its 5 billion year life. So as of right now, the star is fairly homologous as far as all of these other trace elements come from.
Incredible.
You mentioned that it's the heaviest or the most massive thing in our solar system, but I don't want that to go unemphasized because it is the most massive thing in our solar system by a gigantic margin.
Yeah.
Our star is 98% of the total mass of our solar system.
Big.
Yeah. Most of the remaining mass is actually contained in Jupiter. And then less than, I think, 1% or even a half of a percent is all of the rocky planets and asteroids.
Yeah, which is just really like an unfathomable scale at the point that, of humans. Like how many Earths do you think it would make to make a star?
I actually don't know that number off the top of my head, but what I do actually know is that our star has about 300 Earths worth of just iron.
So if that, I mean, that sounds like an amazing reason to mine the star right there. Not to mention you can help improve the longevity of it by doing so as well.
Yeah, that's another reason we might mine a star is it's the idea of stellar husbandry. So for stars, the more massive they are, the faster they actually burn through all of their fusion products because as they become more massive, there's more pressure in their core, and they achieve higher rates of fusion. So by reducing the mass of the star, you actually greatly increase its lifespan by huge margins. I think for our sun, just increasing its mass by 10% would reduce its lifespan by half.
Yeah, just if we were to take, a couple billions of tons of material from the star, we could increase its life by a billion years,
Yeah.
2 billion years, a really, really long time, actually. So it has a lot of really good benefits for the longevity of the star's life.
Yeah, and actually much further than 1 or 2 billion years. You could potentially extend it. If you make it a red dwarf, it's going to last trillions of years. Though I don't think you'd want to go that far with our star because red dwarfs are kind of hard to live around. But you could potentially pull off all of these fusion byproducts as they go, especially things like helium, which don't actually aid in the fusion process and kind of poison the star. So if you can pull off the helium and keep the star mostly hydrogen, it'll extend the lifespan without decreasing the luminosity.
Yeah. I mean, and if we're at the point where we're mining stars already, I don't see any reason why we couldn't pump out helium from the star and then feed it with hydrogen.
Oh, absolutely. When we talk about how we're going to do it, you'll see it's not too hard to separate it because everything in a star is charged plasma. So you can separate by the charge to mass ratio, which is not a complicated thing to do. We do that in the lab every day with mass spectrometry.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about, again, why to mine a star, we mentioned stellar husbandry, which is this idea that we might mine the star to increase its lifespan or to change the luminosity to fit our needs.
Mhm.
I mean, this could be particularly helpful if you want to travel to nearby stars, but they aren't the right class of star for your civilization. Maybe you want a yellow dwarf star like our own, but your nearest stars are much too big. So potentially you can use star lifting to take off that material and bring the star down to a size that you could actually use for colonization.
Oh, yeah. Now, of course, we're talking about civilizations that are incredibly advanced at this point, to where they are shaping the world around them.
Probably at least a Kardashev Type II civilization.
I would, yeah, at least, maybe probably more, a three,
Between
where
a 2 and maybe like a 2.1, 2.2. It is a
yeah,
logarithmic scale.
they would be gods to us essentially. But if you're out there shaping these stars to your whim, these tools of especially, like reforming stars to how you would want them to be, they would be doing that on a massive scale. Producing one star after another in the way that they would want them. Because this is not an undertaking. Like if we are seeing terraforming a planet as a massive undertaking, this is like Jake said, 100x times that difficulty of converting a star.
Yeah, if not even more. I mean, when you're talking about changing the classification of a star, it makes terraforming look like kids in a sandbox.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a huge undertaking, and like you said, this is going to be a very advanced civilization. Which actually brings us to another point, which is you might not star lift to change the classification of a star. You might be star lifting to actually get at some of that material. I know I mentioned there's 300 Earths worth of iron in our star alone, but iron is by no means the largest component of our star. It only makes up about 0.16% of the star by mass. Lighter elements like carbon or oxygen make up slightly more. Carbon's about 0.29%, while oxygen's about 0.77%. But conveniently, these are a lot of the elements that you need to build things like megastructures. I know when we talk about Dyson swarms, O'Neill cylinders, we tend to picture them made out of like metal, like iron, and that's how they're depicted a lot. But I think realistically, they're probably going to be made out of something like carbon nanotubes.
Yeah.
And in which case, having a large abundance of carbon, which here we have 600, maybe even 1,000 Earths worth of carbon just in our sun. So being able to get at that carbon gives you more than enough material to build all these megastructures. One of the biggest things I'm always asked when I talk about Dyson swarms or anything like that is, okay, that's great. Where does the material come from? And a star, just our star, would provide you to build a Dyson storm 20 times over.
Which is insane to think about, really, because I feel like a lot of people, we think about these massive megastructure projects and we're thinking of mining our planet, right? Like Earth, as you can see, when we strip mine it, we're like, oh, we're always running out of materials here. The second that we can unlock mining of stars, that is a far and distant problem.
Yeah.
We will never, it will be like hitting a whole new version of abundance, because not only are we increasing the longevity of our star and mining an infinite amount of resources from it, if we ever do reach that point, we surely have the technology to go and just do it to another star. And we could do it to a supermassive star for hundreds of millions of years. Probably.
Oh, absolutely. Maybe even billions.
Yeah.
And, even if you don't take these trace elements like oxygen, carbon, or iron to build megastructures, the hydrogen itself is also a very valuable resource that you could take from the star. Our star, I think I mentioned maybe in the Dyson Swarm episode or maybe our fusion episode, it's not very efficient with how it burns its hydrogen. And in fact, by the time our star burns out, goes through its red giant phase and becomes a white dwarf, I think it's only going to exhaust around 10% of the total hydrogen it started with, which means by and large, most of the hydrogen that is in our star will not be used for fusion or to make energy. So by extracting the hydrogen from our star and using it for fusion reactors, we could potentially get much more power out of our solar system.
Yeah. I mean, being able to really just help the star work at peak efficiency through artificial intervention, I feel like it's just a natural move forward for highly advanced civilization.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, alternatively, you can also take the hydrogen out of the star and transmute it into what you need through fusion. I think we covered that in our fusion episode as well, but there's nothing stopping you if you have the technology from turning hydrogen all the way up into gold just through fusion processes. Is that an insanely complex and energy intensive endeavor? Absolutely. It is not something we're even close to doing. We haven't even cracked the most basic form of fusion, but it is physically possible. There is nothing in science that forbids it. You just need monumental heats and pressures greater than what's happening in our star right now. You need something equivalent to a supernova. But if you have a civilization who's casually mining stars, it's not hard to imagine they have access to that level of power.
Yeah, no, they probably put like supernova explosions off as fireworks.
Yeah, yeah, for the 100,000th year celebration of our civilization,
It's just
we set up a cluster of stars for supernova at exactly the stroke of midnight.
oh my god, that would be so cool. So jealous of my hypothetical concept.
You should work as a game dev for Stellaris. Maybe. I do want to also point out something that I don't know if anyone has screamed at their computer yet or not, which is that our star, by the way, does not make any of these heavier elements. It doesn't make oxygen, carbon, or anything. The only thing our star makes via fusion is helium. All of these heavier elements are just left over from the star's formation. I just want to point that out. I don't want anyone to get confused and think that our star is producing iron or oxygen or anything else like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely is good clarification. Although there are stars out there that, like Jake was saying, they produce elements, but they usually produce them when they die. Is that correct?
Yeah, if you look at the fusion energy chain, iron is the end of the line, basically. Anything lighter than iron, the fusion process releases more energy than it takes to actually push those elements together. Once you hit iron, you now start losing energy.
Right. Which is why iron is the main killer of stars. The more iron that builds up in a star.
Well, stars really only make iron in the last minutes to seconds of their life. Once they start making iron, that's it. There's no energy to be gained from making iron. So basically the star it's a net energy loss, and then gravity wins that battle. Since there's no radiation pressure pushing out, the whole star collapses in on itself, goes nova, supernova, or what have you, depending on how large the star is.
Yeah, truly fascinating, really. My understanding of the star cycle is not as broad as I thought it was. I mean, I do understand a lot about how the stars work, but they truly are just like the most beautiful thing in the universe. So it's just like awesome to think about what they create and then the end of their life cycle.
Yeah, they are absolutely beautiful. Now let's talk about how we mine them. No, I do want to move on a little bit and talk about the actual mechanics behind star lifting, because I know it's like a huge project, right? Like, how on earth do you even begin to extract materials from something as big and hot as a star?
Um,
Well, it's okay. I can answer it if you want. Oh, actually, there's several different ways, but I think one of the things that is important to keep in mind for this whole process is actually, what is a star? What is it made out of? Stars are plasma. It's the fourth state of matter, and it's just charged particles, which means all of the material in a star can be manipulated by a magnetic field, and that's something really important to keep in mind when we're talking about star lifting.
so if we are harvesting the plasma, pretty much like Jake said, anything that we can use to produce a large amount of magnetic force, like a magnetic field, to be able to manipulate that and then store it or use it immediately for energy.
Yeah, exactly. And the technology to Starlift isn't anything new or fundamental. It's stuff we have now. It's just the scale that is actually the problem. It's done on such a large scale, it's hard to comprehend almost. So, one of the proposed methods for extracting material from a star is just called thermal driven outflow. The idea is that if you can surround the equator of a star with a huge magnetic field, you can then hit the surface of a star with any type of energy, whatever you want. It can be lasers, microwaves, particle beams, whatever. And that will excite the surface of the star and basically send out solar flares. And then this humongous magnetic field that you have generated around the equator of the star will direct all those solar winds up and out from the north and south pole of the star. It'll almost work a little bit like if you can imagine a pulsar, where those are typically depicted having two jets of plasma streaming from the two poles of the star.
Right.
It's kind of a similar concept to that, except for it's the solar winds of the star just being redirected and up and out.
Now, it's cool that you bring up directing lasers or, some kind of massive amount of energy to excite the surface of the sun, because you have to understand that at this point, there will probably be a Dyson swarm around this star already, which can be used to direct those beams of light from the sun back into it to create those excitements on the surface.
Absolutely, yeah. You can just refocus sunlight back onto the star, and that will excite the surface. Technically speaking, you don't have to excite the surface of the star. Just building the magnetic fields around the equator of the star will direct any of the already existing solar winds up and out that can be harvested. But realistically, you're going to want to make the most of the system. That's such an expensive bit of infrastructure to put up that if you're going to do it, you want to excite the star and get the most material out of it that you can.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
you could build a passive system and just extract the natural solar winds that already exit the star.
Yeah, but it's just like if you're already there, doing it like you said, you might as well get the most out of it, because these civilizations are going to be very power hungry for what they're doing. So harvesting as much energy as possible. It's just like with anything now today, humans will always look for the most efficiency.
Absolutely. That is actually not the only method for star lifting, though. We can do a modified version of that same method. So you still have the magnetic field that you need to generate at the star's equator.
Right.
And I forgot to mention, the way we're probably going to do this is if you have a bunch of basically particle accelerators that are shooting electrons around in a circle around the star, that will generate a magnetic field.
Okay. And well, that meant that magnetic field will just follow the path of the particle accelerator, or are you talking about surrounding the whole star in a magnetic field?
The whole star would need to be surrounded in a magnetic field. So you could put a bunch of space stations in an equatorial orbit, and these space stations don't have to be physically connected, but they would basically be massive particle accelerators that accelerate electrons from one station to the next, and they go all the way around the star. So you have electrons moving in a circle around the star. Thanks to the Lorentz law, any moving charged particle generates a magnetic field.
Mhm.
So the net result of this is it would generate a magnetic field that could surround the entire star. It's a toroidal, I'm going to say that word wrong. It looks a bit like the shape of this magnetic field would look a bit like a donut, where you have donut hole in the middle of the star, and that's what directs the plasma up and out the poles of the star.
I see. Yeah, well, I mean, that sounds incredible.
Yeah.
So it's just another way to manipulate it and launch large amounts of material
So
through
this
the
is
top
what-
and the bottom.
Yeah, and this is what would be required for that first type of star lifting as well. This is what's redirecting the solar winds to the north and south poles. But also for the second type of star lifting, it's called a huff and puff design. I actually particularly like this one because it gets around the need to excite the surface of the star.
Okay.
So the way this system works is that instead of having orbital particle accelerators, you actually have non-orbiting particle accelerators that just float above the star. And the way they maintain their position is typically through magnetic field. So the sun itself has a very strong magnetic field. So if these stations have superconducting magnets, they can actually use that to push against the sun's magnetic field and keep their location above the star without having to orbit.
Okay. Now, I just know that the biggest struggle, like with non-orbiting platforms like that, is how do you keep them still?
Well, that's it. So they use the resistive force. They're actually generating an opposite magnetic field to resist the sun's natural magnetic field to resist the force of gravity.
Right. So that keeps it from going into the sun.
Yeah,
Right.
and then it's just general station keeping to not move to any other direction.
Okay.
Basic
All right, I
thrust.
got you.
Or you could potentially even manipulate the magnetic field in an off axis to try to do that. Or you could even use rockets. I guess you don't have to use the magnetic field, but it's nice to not need reaction mass.
Of course. And if the magnetic field is there, might as well use it.
Yeah, exactly. So now if you can imagine, you have all of these stations in hundreds, thousands, millions of them in a circle around the star, and they're all holding the same relative location using the magnetic field, and they're firing electrons to generate a magnetic field around the star. So what these things actually do is if you turn off all of the magnetic fields on these and let them start falling into the star, so now all of these stations are falling into the star, closing in on it, and once they generate a high enough velocity, you turn back on all the magnetic fields and the particle accelerators, and now the magnetic field is closing into the star, and it basically squeezes the star and excites it, and it shoots out jets of plasma, following, again, those magnetic field lines from the north and south pole that you could then harvest.
That's so cool. Wow. So you really are, you're just like, it's like a bellow.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're just smushing it and projecting that mass out.
Exactly. So the name of it, it's called a huff and puff. It's literally named after the big bad wolf and three little pigs. He's going to huff and puff. Yeah, so they fall in, you turn back on the magnetic fields, they squeeze the star, which excites it, sends out a bunch of matter that then gets collected. And then because they're now deeper in the sun's magnetic field, eventually their velocity will reach zero, and then they'll start moving back out. And then once they hit a certain location, again, you just repeat this process, turn off the magnetic fields, let them start falling back again.
Mhm.
And you just have this constant cycling. Now, this is obviously going to create a very non-uniform star lifting process, right? Because it's only generating it while they're falling in and the magnetic fields are on. So the proponents of this design say you would probably have multiple different rings of stations that are all in different stages of this. So they're constantly falling in and turning on the star. So you can get a more constant jet.
Yeah, that's an incredible method. That's very cool. Now, my a big question that I do have is while we're mining these stars, how are we storing this material?
Yeah,
Right?
no, that's a great question.
Because we're all this material is going to be getting launched out of the poles of the star and getting absorbed. And at its core, like you said, it's composed of so many different types of things. Like, how are we separating that and storing it and then properly transporting it to wherever it needs to go? Because that's superheated plasma at that point.
And it's huge, right? These jets coming from the poles of the star are potentially going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of AU long, which is the distance between the sun and Earth. So these are humongous poles that extend well out past the orbits of many of the planets. So, no, that's a great question. So, one of the things you mentioned was how would you sort this material? And I think that is an important question because it does you no good if you can't pull these materials away from all the hydrogen and helium. Thankfully, sorting it is actually fairly straightforward. As I mentioned earlier, all of these particles coming from the sun are charged. And if you expose charged particles to a magnetic field,
Mhm.
we're going to be talking a lot about magnetic fields this episode. If you expose charged particles to a magnetic field, the amount that they deflect will depend on their charge and their mass. It's called the charge mass ratio. This means that different elements will deflect differently in the same strength magnetic field. And you can actually use this to sort elements by their charge mass ratio. This isn't some revolutionary technology, by the way. This is what we do every day in a lab with something called mass spectrometry.
Mhm.
So you can basically use a magnetic field to sort the elements by whatever you want. As far as storing them, again, you have a bunch of options. One of my favorites is that you could actually potentially condense like all the hydrogen and helium into mini gas giants around the star and use those as collection points to then be used when needed.
I mean, that would be brilliant because then you have them in a much more stable state, where they still will be orbiting the
Mhm.
sun, but you can go and collect them in a much less volatile area.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And you might need to cool them down. So one of the rabbit holes I went into when researching this was you can actually do something called laser cooling to cool down the plasma and condense it
Which
on.
sounds crazy.
Yeah, I know. I know in the pre-show discussion, you were like, "How do you cool something down with energy?"
Yes.
And I'm not going to act like I fully understand the process, but from my brief understanding is essentially you can use the lasers to restrict the motion of particles in a given plane. So when you excite the particles with a specific laser, it causes them to lose motion in one direction. So, again, heat is just vibration of the particle. So by
Right.
using this laser light and making the particles slow down in one direction, it's effectively losing heat. And by using three of these different lasers orthogonal to each other, one for the X, Y, and Z axis, you can restrict the particle's motion in all three directions, which is no different from cooling it down.
That is crazy. It's sort of like giving the particles a parachute.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah,
You know, you're just breaking that speed that they're going in by, using an acting speed in a different direction.
yeah. And since energy has to be conserved, you might be wondering, okay, you're restricting the motion. Where's the energy conservation coming in? Well, one of the ways that this motion is constricted is that the lasers are being absorbed by the particles and then being re-emitted as photons. So those photons, when they leave the particle, that's what's actually slowing the particle down.
So they're going to be bright.
Yeah, this will produce a lot of light, and unsurprisingly, on these scales, will need a lot of energy. Thank God there's a star nearby, though, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So you can use this to cool down the plasma, and then hopefully condense it around some, potentially even like dust particles, and eventually even build mini gas giants. Or alternatively, one option that I particularly like, though I don't know if this is a good idea, you could take the helium and the hydrogen and put it on Jupiter. And if we can increase the mass of Jupiter by about 100x, it will also turn into a star.
Oh, that would be great. Then we
So
get 2 stars.
yeah, exactly. You can use that to power the outer solar system and hopefully not ruin the orbits of all the planets around it and cook Earth. But
Well,
uh,
it wouldn't make it any more massive, right? So the orbit should be the
no,
same.
it'll make it more massive. You're adding mass to it,
Oh,
so
right.
yes, it
Yeah,
is
no,
gonna
no,
get more
you're right.
massive.
Well, but how much more? Because
About 100 times more massive.
well, then that absolutely would mess up the gravity.
Yeah, so
That
but I
would
mean, if you can manipulate stars to this level, hopefully you can manage gravitational perturbations.
Well, who knows? I mean, this might be in the very, in the very beginning. We're like, okay, we're mining our star. We need another one, but maybe we can't get to another star still. Time to start turning Jupiter into the all-consuming mass.
But I do think that I think that's probably not a likely use for this material. I do think building smaller gas giants, quote unquote, closer to the star makes a lot of sense because then they're contained in an area of not so much gravity. You know, if you build like a Jupiter-sized gas giant, if you want that material again to use it, you have to get it out of that gravity well you just built, right? You just got all this material out of a huge gravity well that is the sun. You don't really want to put it in another huge gravity well like Jupiter. So you'll probably try to keep it in a gas giant that's just large enough to keep the helium and hydrogen from being blown off by the solar winds,
Mhm.
but no more massive than that.
Yeah. Okay. That definitely makes sense. That application does seem terrifying though, but it's like you said, if we're at that point where we can move stuff around, we'll probably be able to get it to where we're already adjusting the flight paths of planets' orbit for optimal use anyways.
Yeah, I tend to think so. So that's star lifting, but that's not all we can do with stars. We can also move stars around, which is the idea behind stellar engines.
Now, stellar engines are really cool, and there's a lot of different concepts that you can have for stellar engines. But a lot of people think, well, why? Why would you want to move your star? And how would you move your star and all of the planets and all the asteroids that surround it? And of course, there are a lot of different reasons why you would want to move a star, right? To get out of maybe a very lethal situation. I know it's happening far, far in the future, but these are things that are on scale for civilizations that are thinking millions, if not billions of years in the future. But if we have Andromeda coming, and Andromeda will come to collide with the Milky Way one day, we could use that to project the flight path of different stars and planets coming from there and move out of the way of those dangers.
You know, that's actually part of the plot of Revelation Space.
Really?
Yeah, is that the collision with Andromeda is going to create such a big issue. They need to basically move all the stars and arrange them in such a way that they can pull the galaxies together without big problems.
Oh wow, I should write.
Yeah, but you speak of avoiding threats, and of course that is one that you could potentially avoid. But a much more probable one is stars nearby going supernova, or having some type of a dangerous star nearby, something like a pulsar that has a risk of hitting your planet with a gamma ray burst.
Oh, absolutely.
So you might want to move your star, either move your star to avoid this problem, or if you have a larger star, like a supermassive star that's a high risk of going supernova, you might actually want to move that star away from your star.
Mm-hmm. Because I know a lot of people, like, stars are so far from us as they are right now. But if a star does go supernova, especially one of our neighboring massive stars, the effects of that could be felt here on our planet.
One of the mass extinctions on Earth is theorized to come from a gamma ray burst.
From a star. Yeah. Like there are pulsars that are hundreds of light years away that if they emit one of their pulses of gamma ray burst and it crosses the path of our planet, it can completely strip our atmosphere off of our planet.
Yeah.
And that would kill us instantly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one of the reasons why we may want to move a star is either to move our star to a safer region or move away a threatening star from us to a safe region so that it's not at any risk of going supernova and annihilating our planet.
Mm-hmm.
Another option, too, is that you could potentially move stars to make our entire solar system an intergalactic ship.
That sounds so cool.
Yeah. We talk a lot about colony ships. We did like a 3-part series on them.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I talk about these, people always say, who would sign up to be on a generation ship? It sounds horrible, cramped environments and all that. And I've always argued these things can be quite a lot larger than you actually think. And just to drive that point home is that we can turn our entire solar system into a colony ship.
Now, I mean, at that point, it's like, what do you even have to lose?
Yeah.
Because you're living your same life with your same family on your same planet, yet you and all of your friends and everyone you love are on their way to a destination far, far away, and it doesn't feel any different to you at all.
Exactly. Now, I don't actually think you would have a destination. I think much more likely you would get your star moving and just take it on a path around either your galaxy or toward another galaxy, because this is probably one of the only viable methods to try to do intergalactic travel. But either way, you would take your star on a path, and as you were passing potential colonization targets, you would probably send out smaller ships to go colonize those. You would never stop your system.
That's a good point because while we're doing this, our we will still be orbiting the supermassive black hole at the middle of our galaxy, right? We'll just be adjusting that flight pattern.
Yeah, absolutely. Or like I said, this really is maybe one of the only ways we could actually do intergalactic travel. Trying to get to another galaxy is it's going to take so long. The distances involved are so immense and the time scales are so crazy that you really might need the scale of a solar system to get there.
Yeah, I mean, because it's all the time we think about these distant stars, and even if we did get out there and there was life there, it would probably be long dead by the time that we got there, or something entirely different than what we talked to. But what if we could see, a lot of planets that have potential for life? We could move our entire solar system over there, and that way, even if they are millions or hundreds of millions of light years away, we would still be able to be there one day and grow up alongside a community of alien life.
Yeah.
Potentially.
But I do particularly like the idea of taking our solar system on a loop around our galaxy and just dropping off other smaller colony ships as you pass colonization targets. And essentially, our solar system would act as just like a giant seed ship, just seeding the galaxy with humanity. And you could even take it further and imagine that maybe this could be the hub of your intergalactic civilization. And it's constantly doing flybys on the solar system. So it can help to regulate it. Of course, the timescales are still immense. You're talking about millions and millions of years, but it is much more doable.
Yeah, I mean, it is just such a crazy thought because you're just dropping off essentially colonies and not like the farthest point away that they could ever be from another human being is every moment that you move away from them.
Yeah, until you start moving back toward them if you're doing circles.
Yeah. Timmy, just wait 200 million years.
We'll
Earth's going to pass by again. It's when we'll all get together. It is a crazy concept, but that probably would be the most efficient way for us to just spread humanity out.
That is one of my favorite ideas for interstellar colonization, is just using the entire solar system as the colony ship.
And the craziest part is, if nobody told you,
you would never know.
You would never know.
I mean, our sun is moving now, so it's not like it's a new concept. It's not like our solar system is not already on the move.
Yeah, exactly. And it's moving fast, right? So it's not like we're going to speed this process up. I mean, we might, but you're not going to feel it. And there won't even be any forces really acting on Earth except for the gravity of the sun that's moving. It's not like we have to put, specific engines or anything on everything in the solar system. The sun will still pull us with it the same way it always has.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that point. That is true. A lot of people ask me, okay, we're going to move the star. What about the planets? The planets are gravitationally bound to the star. So as long as you're not accelerating the star so fast to break that gravitational pull, which good luck, then they're coming with you for the ride.
Yeah, absolutely.
So speaking of moving the star, one of the things I love about stellar engines, especially the first one we're going to talk about, which is the Shkadov thruster, is this sounds like such a monumental task to move a star. And you're probably trying to think about how it can be done with all this complicated technology. But the Shkadov thruster is beautifully simple. It doesn't require any amazing technology or monumental breakthroughs because the only thing it's made out of is a thin reflective film. Basically a mirror or tinfoil, if you will.
It is a massive dome of Reynolds wrap.
Yes. But yeah, so the Shkadov thruster, which is the Class A stellar engine, is essentially just a massive hemispherical mirror that you could put over the sun. Now, the idea behind this is that, again, much like the satellites we were talking about in the star lifting example that would remain in place, this mirror wouldn't orbit. It's actually a statite. It stays in one place relative to the sun, and it uses the radiation pressure coming off of the star to resist the fall of gravity. Now, for our star, I think it's something like 1.5 to 3 grams per cubic meter that you can support just off the light pressure coming from the star.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that range depends on how reflective your material is. Reflective materials get twice the thrust as non-reflective materials for photons because they're absorbing the photon and then re-emitting it in the same direction. Forces always have to cancel out, so they receive twice the thrust. So for the Shkadov thruster, if you could imagine, just a gigantic hemispherical dome made of this really thin material that's held aloft by the light pressure of the sun. And then it When photons hit it, it redirects them back into the star.
Yes, but not all of them.
Only half, because
Right.
it covers half the star.
Mhm.
This asymmetry in radiation pressure coming off the star is actually what provides the thrust for the stars. The entire solar system will move toward the mirror.
Yeah, it really is an incredible concept. It does have a couple downsides to it, though. The first one being that it is the slowest,
It is very slow, yes.
but it's not slow. It will allow for us to make adjustments. They just will not be enough to escape a supernova if we learned about it only a million years prior.
Yes, but it would work for moving the entire solar system around. I think a Shkadov thruster around our star that encases half the star still produces a lot of thrust. It produces 1.28 times 10 to the 18th newtons of thrust,
Mhm.
which is an insane amount of thrust. That is such a huge amount of thrust, except for the fact that our star weighs 1.99 times 10 to the 30th kilograms. So the thrust to mass ratio is fairly abysmal, even though it is a lot of thrust. And the numbers work out about like this. In a million years, with a Shkadov thruster around our sun that is 100% reflective, our sun would reach a speed of 20 meters per second and a displacement of 0.03 light years. So
Yeah.
not great. But given a billion years, we would reach 20 kilometers per second. And at this point, we would have moved by 34,000 light years, which is over a third of the distance of the Milky Way.
That's incredible, right? And like we were saying before, this is for civilizations that are looking to make changes over millions of years, not over 100, right? So those small adjustments can make a big difference in the future. But that engine, it is still technically an engine, but it does have another flaw as well, which is it can only move in one direction.
No, you can aim it.
Well, because it has to be static,
You can
right?
still move it.
Right, but then if we were to turn it,
Mhm.
right, in any direction that was to, let's say, not on the poles, it would fry the planets behind it.
I see what you're saying. Yes, you do have to be mindful of the planetary orbits, which is why these are typically denoted as being put over the poles. But you can still turn it because you can still do an asymmetry in the way it's reflecting light. So, for example, if you had a material that could change its reflectivity
Mm-hmm.
and you decided to allow one section of the dome to become less reflective, it would now stop reflecting those photons back to the sun, and this would change the thrust direction of the star itself.
Interesting. It would be sort of like putting an oar in a kayak and into the water, only on one
Kind
side.
of, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and sort of like turning yourself that way. Yeah, I actually haven't thought of that. So that is a very cool concept.
Yeah, no, you can absolutely steer the star. But you do bring a good point, which is that, these numbers I gave, they assume a hemisphere of this reflector. So you definitely do need to be mindful of, like, if you want to keep your planet, right, not obscuring your planetary orbit. And that may restrict by how much you can build. I also want to point out this does not need to be a solid shell. It can also be hundreds of millions of stationary statites of smaller mirrors. It does not have to be one solid structure.
Yeah. And because of that, it definitely makes this the easiest stellar engine to conceive.
Oh, absolutely. And it actually works better on larger stars because larger stars, while they have more mass, the luminosity, which is what actually provides the thrust, does not scale linearly with mass. So massive stars can be moved faster with Shkadov thrusters. So if you have a star nearby that's at risk of going nova, your best bet is probably to move that star versus trying to move our star.
Yeah. So the larger the star, the better.
Yeah, yeah, especially for the Shkadov. At least in terms of thrust, in terms of top speed, smaller stars tend to work better because they last so much longer.
Yeah. It's just getting up to that top speed.
It takes
like you
much,
said,
much longer.
millions of years.
Absolutely. So that's one type of stellar engine we can make, but there are some other ones that do a little bit better.
Yeah. Ones that you would probably think of more when you think of a stellar engine, right? Something that is producing like something similar to a rocket nowadays. We have a Caplan thruster, for example. It's a statite engine that is essentially pulling in that plasma from the star, separating it into superheated gases and using that to both propel and tug the star along.
Yeah, this essentially works off of the same concept as star lifting. You lift material off of the star, and then you feed it into a Bussard ramjet, which I know we covered in our interstellar travel episode. This is essentially just a giant magnetic field that collects all this plasma, condenses it to a point at which it undergoes fusion again, and then you can use this fusion to produce thrust. Now, the Caplan thruster actually has to produce basically it's like two different rockets. it has to fire one beam of energy back at the star, which it actually uses to push the star away from itself. It then fires another beam of energy out the back of itself, which it uses to thrust itself toward the star. And so you need to make sure you balance out all these forces in such a way that the Caplan thruster itself is moving toward the star at the same rate the star is moving away from it. And the net result of this is that you can move the entire solar system. And this is much faster than the Shkadov thruster.
Oh, yes. And it's much more adjustable.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So you can have that reposition anywhere that you want on the star, because the jet that's being used to propel the star is not going to launch out far enough to cause any damage to any planets behind it. You also can adjust the amount of thrust, right? Just by based off of the amount of energy that you're pulling in. Of course, it'll have a minimum because fusion is taking place and it will need energy to continue. But this is also a thruster that you can just turn on and off.
Yeah, that is true. Definitely harder to do with a mirror.
Yeah, like you would have to remove the entire object of the mirror, or I mean, maybe they could do something like where they have glass when it has a charge run through it. Yeah,
possibly. Yeah,
I mean, this is very far in the future, but just with the concepts that we have now for what would be working, it would be much more manipulative.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, like I said, it is much faster. It's predicted that this type of thruster could get you up to 200 kilometers per second after a mere 5 million years.
Yeah, which is pretty substantial if you're talking about moving all the way around the Milky Way. Because if you can gain that amount of difference, you would be able to navigate to any point that you want in the Milky Way. I mean, I know it sounds like a long time, but probably within a couple billion years.
Oh, yeah. I mean, especially when you're comparing it to the Shkadov thruster, you're doing 200 kilometers a second after 5 million years versus doing 20 kilometers a second after a billion years. So this is orders of magnitude faster.
Yep. And just one thing about this is, of course, it will be consuming the star as it does that, as opposed to just the mirrors redirecting the star's energy that it was already creating. But again, this is usually a good thing for our star, and it would take billions of years, right, for it to be worn out. So if we did have a destination in mind somewhere in the Milky Way, chances are we would be able to reach that destination before it destroyed our star.
Yeah, speaking of matter, the figure I gave for 200 kilometers a second, that assumed that you're using about 1,000 kilograms of star material every second.
It's really not that much.
No, it's really not, especially on the scale of a star. It's going to take you a very, very long time to actually exhaust that star.
Yeah, like we're talking, you could mine millions of tons of material every single second, and it would live for billions of years.
Yeah, it would take a very long time. The final type of stellar engine we can also talk about is the idea of a Star Tug, which is kind of fun. It combines the two we just talked about, the Shkadov thruster and the Caplan thruster. So the idea is that instead of using the two thrust approach that the Caplan thruster has, where it has to fire a beam of energy at the star to push it and then fire a beam of energy backwards to push the whole system forward,
right?
The Star Tug actually instead uses a massive mirror to excite the surface of the star, which is the same thing you need to do with the Caplan thruster. It harvests that stellar material and then it fires two beams of energy, narrowly missing the star. If you can imagine, these are fired at like an off angle that barely missed the star. And then the star is actually pulled forward toward the thruster by its own gravity. So you need to make this tug absolutely massive. It needs to have enough mass to attract the star toward itself with gravity.
Wait, so that's like on a crazy scale, though.
It is and it isn't. I mean, so gravity affects everything. I mean, technically, even a pea will attract the sun toward it given enough time.
Of course.
Really, the only constraint in terms of how much mass you need to do this is how fast you want to accelerate. Because if you want to go faster, you need to make the tug more massive so that it can attract the star toward itself. That's going to be your limiting factor right there.
Right. So I imagine that would probably work similarly off of how mass does, right? If you have something that's just as massive as the star, they will both move towards each other at the same rate.
Yeah.
Right. So,
but you don't need anything near that massive.
Of course, because you're slowly just trying to gain acceleration.
Yeah.
But how massive do you think it would have to be? Probably like the size of Earth.
I would say several Earth masses.
Several Earth masses?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it would need to be massive. Maybe, around Jupiter's mass could work pretty well. I haven't done the math in advance to figure out how massive you would need to get these types of accelerations.
Oh, of course.
But really, the only two constraining factors for acceleration with this method is how much material can you extract from the star to drive thrust and how much gravity is attracting the star toward your thruster. Because if you have too much thrust, right, then the thruster is going to move away from the star. And of course, if you have too little, it'll fall into the star. So it's just a balancing act between gravity and between thrust. The more massive your thruster is, the faster you can accelerate your star. Also, gravity works with distance. So if you're able to get the same mass thruster closer to the star, has a stronger gravitational pull and can provide more thrust.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is a very interesting concept. And it definitely could work, especially if we harvested the material for that massive, engine out of the star, because then that reduces the mass of the star and adds it to that engine.
Which is true, and that's one of the things we said for star lifting is that you would probably use this to build megastructures. Now, one of the nice things about the Star Tug is because all of the harvested material from the star is being used for thrust, it's actually more efficient than the Caplan thruster. Because the Caplan thruster has to split the material it harvests from the star. One is to send an energy beam back toward the star, and another one is to push the whole system forward.
Yeah.
And also, unlike the Caplan thruster and the Shkadov thruster, it doesn't heat up the star. So the Shkadov thruster, because it's reflecting light back to the star, it causes the star to burn hotter and faster. And the Caplan thruster is directly firing a beam of energy into the star, which again causes it to burn hotter. The Star Tug, while it does harvest material from the star, so you might need to excite the star to do that, it's at least not directly heating the star in the process, unless you want it to. Now, you might decide to heat the star to gain more material to harvest for the Star Tug, but it's not a necessary part of this whole system. One of these systems, in theory, if properly tuned, could get our solar system up to 27% the speed of light. The only downside is it would convert our star to a brown dwarf in the process.
Which would not be good.
No, yeah, not ideal, but potentially maybe you could harvest some hydrogen along the way. And maybe that's what you would do is you would, as you were passing other systems, maybe you would even send ships ahead to harvest hydrogen and stuff to send toward your system, and you would scoop it up on the way to keep refueling your star.
Well, it's like you said before, maybe we're not using it for our star system.
That too.
Maybe
Yeah.
we're using it to take another, dangerous star system out, or we want to reduce it because it's about to go supernova, or collapse in on itself and explode. If we can harvest that mass and also get it away from us.
Yeah, it's the best of both.
Yeah. You just throw a Star Tug on it, send it off. We don't even have to keep it in the Milky Way. Just get out of here. Just have it leave orbit of the supermassive black hole entirely.
Man, that's going to ruin someone's day somewhere.
Oh, well, whatever.
Is that a star?
It's an entire solar system. Yeah. But yeah, it's of course these concepts are very, very alien, very, very out there, but they are something that if our civilization does exceed a Kardashev level 2, these are just things that they'll be doing. Like these are parameters that are even set in the Kardashev scale, the ability to manipulate one's entire galaxy. That's what this is, which is why I think it's just such a cool concept to talk about.
Well, on that note, I think that's everything I have to say about stellar engineering. I do think we could probably do follow-up episodes on this.
Yeah, we definitely can. And you'll see it as we continue talking about other concepts, especially when we get into more megastructures and how they work. They're all going to rely on things like star lifting and stellar engine.
Especially, yeah, megastructure. Star lifting is a huge process by which we would get that material. So thank you all for joining us. If you like this type of stuff, please join us for our next episode, where we will be doing a deep dive on the Kardashev scale and other potential civilization scales. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please consider following us on Threads. And I forgot to mention in our last 2 episodes, we have started recording our post-episode discussions and uploading that to our Patreon for both free and paid members. I do want to emphasize, you do not have to be a paid subscriber to get this content. If you do choose to support the show through a paid membership, you will get the content a week earlier. And Lucas and I are working on building up a backlog to increase the lead time for paid members to 2 weeks. But all material we make will still be available for both paid and free members.
Yeah, we really just wanted to put something out there to let you guys get to know us personally a little bit more.
Yeah, our post-episode discussions are both about how we feel about this episode, the podcast in general, and, we talk a little bit more about our personal lives and ourselves. So it is a good way to get to know us if you feel so inclined, though if not, we fully understand the show itself is fine by itself.
Of course, but we would love to see you guys over there. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much for listening. Take care.
Bye-bye.